Good evening. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this UKLFI Charitable Trust webinar, Holocaust Denial, What Role Should the Law Play? Over the last year, we have experienced a new form of Holocaust denial, and in July, UKLFI hosted an in-person event on denial of the 7th of October. Now, this phenomenon has reignited debates on how to contend with denialism and distortion. We'll be asking, how has the law been used to counteract distortion and denial and to restrict speech on the Holocaust in the past? That's including more recent initiatives in Europe to criminalise the attribution of blame for involvement in the Holocaust or cooperation with the Nazis in atrocities committed against Jews. And we'll be asking what could and should the law do to contend with these phenomena, including the current distortion of the context of the pogrom of the 7th of October and its aftermath. Joining me is Professor Aleksandra Gliszczynska-Grabias, who is Professor of International Human Rights Law at the Institute of Law Studies of the Polish Academy of Sciences and a member of the Board of Governors of the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. In July 2024, she was appointed the head of the Advisory Council to the Polish Minister of Justice and Prosecutor General on counteracting hate crimes and hate speech. She specialises in constitutional law, legal tools for fighting anti-Semitism, freedom of speech, vulnerable groups' rights, and legal governance over memory. She's held numerous fellowships, including at the University of Cambridge, Yale University, and the European University Institute. She's co-editor and co-author of Constitutionalism Under Stress and Law and Memory Towards Legal Governance of History. Ladies and gentlemen, may I encourage you to put your questions to the professor into the Q&A facility of Zoom for the discussion after her presentation. Professor, you are very welcome.
Thank you so very much, Natasha, and thank you for the invitation. I'm really honored to be with you tonight. I will share my screen now to start the presentation. I hope it works. Can you just please confirm that you can see my screen and it's fine?
Certainly can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, yes. So Holocaust denial, what role should the law play? At first, I thought that perhaps discussing Holocaust denial in the situation that we all are so aware of and so worried about, for sure, when we are confronted with the tsunami of the worst anti-Semitic hate speech and hate crime, shouldn't be perhaps the first choice for discussing nowadays. And very often there is the assumption being made that perhaps Holocaust denial is not that relevant topic to discuss anymore. But as it seems, it's quite the opposite. As we are observing this growing amount of anti-Semitism all around the world, we are also at the same time simultaneously observing the growth in numbers of Holocaust denial, and both these phenomena go hand in hand. And it seems that the more anti-Semitism related to October 7th appears also online, the more Holocaust denial statements, contents, theories are being disseminated, which only proves how anti-Semitism can be expressed and related to each other in all of its forms. So let me start by by some examples. First, from the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. So just the examples of Holocaust denial contents and expressions. So I would say that these first ones are more subtle or elegant to use perhaps not this is not the proper word, but this is what appears in the cases that were under examination by the European Court of Human Rights. I will get to the assessment by the Court of Holocaust Denial cases in a moment, but these are expressions, statements like the so-called Holocaust, Auschwitz projections, autonomous self-governed Jewish district to describe the ghettos, Jewish ghettos in the territories of Nazi German-occupied Poland. But then we have the examples from social media from just 2 months ago, as I have been also involved in one of the projects that that deals with monitoring Twitter, Facebook, when it comes to anti-Semitism appearing on these social platforms. So, and these are just examples from Poland. So these are my translations, and it wasn't that easy to translate some of these ways of referring to the Holocaust that appeared there. But what we can see here is that, among other forms of anti-Semitism, also closely related to October 7th events, this motif of denying the Holocaust appears all over. Again, these are just selected examples, but there are thousands of similar appearing online every day. And it's just Poland. And we should stress this, that when it comes to post-October 7th anti-Semitism, Poland and other Central Eastern European states are quite different from what we observe in, so to say, Western Europe. And I'm really happy about it and somehow proud about it. That the situation isn't that bad as it is in the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, or France. However, these are examples of Holocaust denial, very direct one, that has been expressed in relation to discussions concerning October 7th. In the Polish internet, Polish versions of social media, including Twitter and Facebook. So as we can see, this is really all connected and appears in the context of the discussions over October 7th. And as we for sure all know, all EU member states and Council of Europe member states implement legal bans on Holocaust denial in various forms, in various range and scope. But still, there are legal bans on denying Holocaust. Of course, the quite different and separate thing is if these bans are effective, and we'll get to this also while discussing the options for criminalizing October 7th massacres denial. But the legal situation in Europe is clear. It is outside the scope of free speech to deny the Holocaust. And also for the aspiring or new EU member states, the bans on Holocaust denial serve as an indicator of belonging to the European community of values. So before the states of Central and Eastern Europe joined the EU, it was one of the conditions actually to introduce legal bans on Holocaust denial. And of course, it's just, you know, to stress that this is a very European context, and it's Europe related, of course, because of the history of this continent. And the US context is quite different, even though I'm also aware that the UK context is not that the same, to put it this way, like in other European states. But still, the difference between the European approach towards Holocaust denial and US approach towards criminalization of the denial is the most significant difference, I would say. And also something important to mark, to note, is that this legal consensus over penalizing Holocaust and criminalizing Holocaust denial in Europe does not refer to the denial of other genocides. And we have here a famous Perinczek versus Switzerland judgment of the European Court of Human Rights of its Grand Chamber, where actually the court stated that that the Holocaust remains unique in the sense of allowing or finding the bans, legal bans on Holocaust denial as justified, while not perceiving the same attitude or towards the denial bans when it comes to other genocides, like in this case the Armenian genocide. So this legal consensus, the legal taboo, so, as some claim, over Holocaust denial is only applicable by the European Court of Human Rights exactly towards the Holocaust, and it doesn't apply to other genocides or the denial of other genocides. Among EU instruments, the Council Framework Decision of 2008 is quite important, and it sets the boundaries of the obligation of EU member states when it comes to Holocaust denial, but also more broadly genocide denial, penalization and criminalization. But it needs to be stressed that the reports concerning implementation of this framework decision, the first report came after 10 years, there was another one. They clearly indicate that we are, among EU member states, we are far from unified the same model of penalizing genocide denial, including Holocaust denial. So there are huge doubts as to the effectiveness of this instrument. But anyhow, it exists, and it should be mentioned when we present the legal scope of regulation concerning Holocaust denial in Europe, within European legal sphere. The most stable and established standard when it comes to Holocaust denial bans is the one established by the European Court of Human Rights, and the court on numerous occasions, in numerous cases, actually stated repeatedly that Holocaust denial does not belong to the sphere of free speech, and should be perceived as a form of anti-Semitism and defamation of Jews. And one of the most significant decisions of the court concerning Holocaust denial was the one in Gorody versus France, where the court expressed its attitude towards Holocaust denial, exactly stating that this is one of the most serious forms of racial defamation of Jews and of incitement to hatred of them. And this attitude hasn't changed, and the latest judgments concerning Holocaust denial were issued 2 and 3 years ago, and actually this attitude of the court stays the same, stays unchanged. So we have like a very strong legal argument confirming that the bans on Holocaust denial are in accordance with the European Convention on Human Rights. And this is actually undisputed also among lawyers, even though, of course, the very idea of criminalizing, penalizing denial is disputed. But here I just gave two more examples. One example showing how broad the scope of the contents qualified by the European Court of Human Rights as Holocaust denial is. So it's not only about the direct denial, it's also about suggesting even the denial, or even like in this case of Mbala versus France, even a kind of artistic, so to say, performance with the participation of the Holocaust denier was considered to be a Holocaust denial case. So this scope is very broad, and the European Court of Human Rights qualifies as the denial also all forms which we would rather qualify as distortion. But the court is very strict when it comes to Holocaust denial. So even such controversial examples as this one, perhaps we can also discuss if this attitude of the court should be limited. This very strict attitude should be limited only to a direct denial, a very obvious one, or it should encompass also such not obvious, so to say, forms of Holocaust denial. And well, yes, this broad question of legitimacy of penalizing Holocaust denial is the subject of legal dispute, mostly among academics, legal academics, and these who deal with freedom of speech. Because for sure this is a very serious ingression into free speech of these who aim at denying the Holocaust. And this conversation, this dispute is taking place even today, and it's of course an interesting discussion. At the same time, the European legal perspective is well established. So perhaps it's more about discussing it in the United States or elsewhere than in Europe. But still, it's of course good to exchange the views pro and against the legal bans on Holocaust denial. And in Europe, of course, there are also examples of the courts, in particular constitutional courts, that have stated that some legal provisions, national legal provisions, were unconstitutional, as it happened in Spain in 2007, where the court stated that that the danger of restricting free public debate within the democratic society of Spain overrides the need to counteract dissemination of Holocaust denial. Later on, and also on the basis of EU regulations, Spain reintroduced such ban, formulating it in a slightly different way. But such judgments also have been issued in Europe. And there is this major Holocaust denial as anti-Semitism argument. And this is one of the most important ones when we speak about arguments for penalization and criminalization. Another one is also one of the most important ones, deals with the dignity of the Holocaust victims and also Holocaust survivors. But the one concerning anti-Semitism, and then qualifying anti-Semitism as hate speech, which again remains outside the scope of free speech in Europe, is, I believe, a very important and legitimate one. But this is, as we said, the Holocaust denial. But the distortion, a more subtle form of denialism, is even more not only interesting but also widespread and problematic. because it's not that easy to qualify particular contents as distorting the Holocaust. And I believe that Poland is one of my home country, is one of the most fascinating examples on how Holocaust distortion can look like, and how it can be also enshrined in law, both in legal provisions, but also in court assessments of cases concerning Holocaust past. The Holocaust distortion in Poland, as I said, has not only legal but also very strong political dimension, or I should rather say it has had this dimension because we have been for the last 8 years under the rule of Law and Justice Party with a very particular view on memory and history and Polish-Jewish relations, which can be summarized as portraying Poles only as saviors of others and victims, of course, and never perpetrators of atrocities committed against the others, mainly against minorities, and in this particular context, against the Jews. But there is, at the same time in Poland, not that much of direct denial, even though I gave you the examples of the online denial. But still, to deny the Holocaust in the country, in the state, where the German Nazi concentration camps were established, is quite difficult. But at the same time, this distortion then takes the place of the denial. This distortion has also manifested itself in the form of rehabilitation of controversial national heroes. So these who really were fighting for the independence of Central Eastern states, including Poland, but at the same time committed crimes against the Jews. But I should add that this rehabilitation phenomenon is mostly visible nowadays in Baltic states. And then something very characteristic for Poland, the competition of victimhood syndrome. So Polish versus Jewish suffering and victimhood. And this is, again, very controversial. But one of the reasons, and I think that this is not to justify this attitude of many Poles and also former Polish government, but for sure it's true that the Central Eastern European suffering and the victimhood during World War II and after World War II under Stalinist communist rule has never become the part of the, I would say, historical DNA of the whole Europe. So we have always felt as these who are not being fully understood by European political environment, or even more broadly Europe as such. So that can be one of the reasons of such competition of victimhood, even though, of course, anti-Semitic motives are also very strong in this context. So this is just one of the examples, perhaps well known, that can characterize or explain this phenomenon of Holocaust distortion. This is a picture or photo taken during the commemoration of Jedwabne pogrom victims on one of the anniversaries, the last year anniversary. The Jedwabne pogrom, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this, what happened in Jedwabne in 1941, July 1941, where Polish neighbors burned their Jewish neighbors alive in a barn, more than 400 of them. And it was described for the first time by Professor Gross, a scholar from Princeton. So this poster here says Gross lies, and we demand exhumations, we demand the truth. So the narratives of a serious part of the Polish society is that these were Germans, not Poles, who committed this crime. And there is a whole movement around distorting this part of history of the Holocaust and actually trying to prove that these were not Poles who murdered the Jews in Jedwabne. And this is the symbolic grave of the victims of Jedwabne pogrom, and the sprayed thing here says, I missed the no, it should be no, also visible here, but it says, I do not apologize for Jedwabne. So this is yet another example of how strong these emotions accumulate around Jedwabne. And then we had a kind of a translation of these emotions into binding law, and the famous, or rather infamous, Holocaust Bill of 2018. And again, I'm sure this is well-known example of Holocaust distortion, because it became world famous, mostly because of the reaction of the governments of Israel and US against this law. But this was the expression of the intention to distort the Holocaust, to silence the discussion about the perpetrators of crimes committed against the Jews, introduced by the government itself. So here we can say that the distortion, Holocaust distortion, was a part of a state policy, historic policy, and then translated into law. Because of the protests, fierce protests against this law, it has been changed very quickly. So we got the June amendment to the January amendment of the Act on the Institute of National Remembrance, because the so-called Holocaust Bill was the amendment to the Act on National Institutes of Remembrance. So just 5 months later, after as some claim, some secret negotiations between the governments, there was a change in this law. So in the form of the provision as we have it right now, still in force, there are no criminal law sanctions, which is of course extremely important, because the chilling effect is different if one has or is endangered with the imprisonment of up to 3 years for example, his or her historical research on Holocaust. But still, there are civil law sanctions available for these who want to go, for example, against Holocaust historians, Holocaust scholars, and the lawsuits can be brought in front of the civil courts. And here, the financial aspect of such lawsuits is extremely troubling. And I must tell you that for this 8 years of the rule of the Law and Justice Party, I have been asked, I don't even know how many times, by Polish scholars, mostly younger scholars, who were considering if they should publish their PhDs if these dissertations dealt with Holocaust past. And they were asking me to review their manuscripts, their articles, their books before publication, because they feared they could be then sued for the results of their research. That was really scary for me. That was like the end of the academic freedom. It's not that much the case anymore, because in October 2023, there was a government change in Poland, and pro-democratic and rule of law obeying parties took over the power and form the government. But still, the fact that this provision is still in force is problematic when we talk about distortion potential of states' actions and laws that are being implemented. This distortion aspect was also visible in the courtroom, and one of the most important cases here was the case of a lawsuit against Professor Engelking and Professor Jan Grabowski for their book There Is Still Night, describing the crimes, atrocities committed against the Jews during the occupation in Poland, in the eastern part of Poland. So these two volumes of this publication, more than 1,600 pages, they included one passage describing a particular person as co-responsible for betraying the Jews to the Nazis, the Jews that were in hiding in the forest. And the grandniece of the person described in the book filed a lawsuit against both professors, even though Professor Grabowski was not even the author of this passage. He was only sued as a co-editor of the whole volume. So this case was a very high-profile one, and I was serving as an advisor to the defense team. And on the appeal, fortunately, the case was won by professors. But at the same time, in first instance judgment, the court ordered apology to the plaintiff, and at the same time, the court then played a kind of a role of a historian, judging the results of historical research conducted by both professors. But what's also extremely important here is the reaction of the politicians that should have never taken place and is unacceptable. But at the same time, it shows the general atmosphere and this policy of distortion. So the former prosecutor general and minister of justice from the Law and Justice Party, Zbigniew Ziobro, he stated that the judgment of the Court of Appeal is not just an embarrassment to the court, it's a judicial assault on justice. So he was that unhappy with the judgment, dismissing the claim by the plaintiff that he posted this on Twitter, while the former Minister of Education called in a very similar context, but also in relation to this case of this book and this lawsuit, an anti-poll. So this was the environment in which also lawyers had to find a way to defend their clients, the clients being Holocaust scholars, from these forms of Holocaust distortion. And now, well, yes, we get to the October 7th denial and distortion and how this whole combines, I would say, into one pattern and the same goals that are characteristic for the denial of the Holocaust. So we have the undermining the credibility of victims, blaming the victims for this what happened to them, accusing them of manipulation to gain advantage, etc. So these are like the most traditional, deeply rooted elements of Holocaust denial, and we see this whole all of them when it comes to the denial of October 7th pogroms, which normally should sound like something unimaginable, because the evidence is so overwhelming and so obvious that denying these crimes can seem like mission impossible, but it seems to be very well possible and conducted. And the report that I quote here of March 2024 by Cyberwall, it shows the amount this kind of contents and the amount of viewers who get to know this denied version of the events of October 7th. I believe that this phenomenon that we are witnessing right now of the denial and distortion of October 7th pogrom is much more dangerous than classic Holocaust denial because it translates directly into hate speech and hate crime against the Jews. And this what happened in Amsterdam just weeks ago is the best example of how speech and the narratives and propaganda and the denial and distortion leads to violence, to pogroms or the attempts of the pogroms. And this is why I think that the potential of October 7th denial is genocidal, actually, in its nature. And this is why I believe the legal response should follow. As for now, there is this attempt that should be concluded soon in Israel to criminalize the denial of October 7th attack. But at the same time, it's in Israel. It's something obvious that should happen on this legal sphere. Even though, which is interesting, the first Holocaust denial laws were not introduced in Israel. Earlier ones were established in Europe, in Germany for sure. But now Israel came up with this legal response. But what should be really important is to actually convince others, and in particular European legislators, to develop similar legal provisions. If this is possible at all, I truly doubt it. Perhaps except of some singular states, including Germany, Austria, and Central Eastern Europe, I would see an option here. But with what we observe when it comes to the majority of European states, Western European states in particular, and their attitude towards anti-Semitism, post-October 7th anti-Semitism, makes me think that this is highly impossible, or it's actually impossible at all for them to introduce such bans, because the governments of some of these countries are perhaps not denying this would happen on October 7th, but for sure finding or trying to find all kinds of explanations, if not justifications for this what happened on October 7th. Another option that I would see would be an action taken on the level of the European Union, even though, of course, here the member states need to agree on particular legal instruments to be implemented. But still, there are some options for perhaps proposing something even symbolic in this regard. Even though, as I said, if we agree on penalizing Holocaust denial, that doesn't lead to such dramatic consequences as October 7th denial, then the European legal community should actually push for similar legal instruments when it comes to this new form of denial and distortion of the crimes committed against the Jews. I think I will stop here. I'm also, I believe, running out of time, but I will be really happy to take questions and discuss with you the issues concerning the denial and distortion in both of these contexts. Thank you very much.
Well, Aleksandra, thank you so much. We've had quite a lot of questions, which are quite long. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to take the opportunity, and I trust our audience will understand, to summarize a lot of them coming out of the Q&A facility. But may I begin in the first instance by just exploring the sort of connection that you've started to tease out between traditional Holocaust denial and what we've been witnessing in the last 13 months vis-a-vis the 7th of October. We've got a very international audience, and it strikes me it may assist to tease out some of the philosophical underpinnings, if you will, of the Holocaust denial, criminalization, and the reasons that it exists in the specific countries that you've outlined. It strikes me it's that very real experience of the Holocaust, Germany, Poland, all of those countries that were very much touched by it, that has prompted quite an unusual piece of legislation in countries that otherwise do enjoy quite substantial freedom of speech. It doesn't exist in the US, it doesn't exist in the UK. Given the perhaps philosophical underpinnings for this unusual piece of legislation, can you potentially see any linkage being drawn out from that to the 7th of October? Or is this essentially a very European-centric reflection of the experience of these countries in the Holocaust itself?
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe that the Holocaust bans in Europe came as a form of the commitment to never again to uphold this call for never again when it comes to the Holocaust. Of course, the level of responsibility of such countries like Germany and Austria also towards penalization, criminalization of Holocaust denial is quite different. But at the same time, Europe, if we think about it as a community of values and shared memory, should also share this duty to remembrance translated into legal bans of denying the Holocaust. As I said, one of the most important arguments for penalization is the fact that Holocaust denial is being treated as a form of anti-Semitism. So the same like anti-Semitic insults, defamation, etc. So this is one thing. But another, and I believe that this is perhaps the strongest link that we can perhaps build on this similarities also between the denial of the Holocaust and October 7th is the dignity of the victims, of Jewish victims of the Holocaust, which was also a form of anti-Semitism. So this commitment embraces also the obligation to protect the dignity of the Holocaust victims and Holocaust survivors, Jewish ones. So I see very good reasons also to protect the dignity and memory of the victims of this biggest pogrom that has ever taken place after the war, Second World War, October 7th pogrom. And perhaps this should be the reason for the European governments to still see or feel their obligation to protect the Jews, also in that sense. And of course, there is a crucial issue of qualifying this what happened of October 7th as the consequence of murderous genocidal anti-Semitism and the form of such. But in order to then qualify it exactly as anti-Semitism, we need to agree that this was a manifestation of anti-Semitism. And as we know, this is being very strongly disputed. it's being portrayed, presented as a form of anti-Israeli hatred, perhaps, but not the crime committed against the Jews as such, and not the form of anti-Semitism, but just a form of hatred towards Israelis. And here is the challenge, I believe, to convince perhaps also the legislators that this is actually again and again the situation concerning anti-Semitism, or that anti-Israelism and this kind of hatred is a form of anti-Semitism. But this is more and more problematic. For example, when it comes to the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, it's being more often nowadays disputed if this definition should actually be binding in many European states, because it gives the examples of anti-Israeli hatred as anti-Semitism, or qualifying them as anti-Semitism.
Yes. Well, it strikes me also, just continuing this comparison between Holocaust denial and denial of the 7th of October, with the Holocaust, society at large did get to a place where it recognized what had happened. And of course, there will always have been elements, extreme elements that disputed that the nature of the distortion and the denial that we've seen of the 7th of October has been perhaps more widespread and mainstream than Holocaust denial itself has ever been. In particular, news stories of helicopter gunships having caused the majority of the casualties on the 7th of October. They have appeared across significant media. I wonder if in that context that impossibility that you've outlined is perhaps made out. There is a question that I think touches on this, and it asks whether there is an equivalent to the Holocaust distortion examples that you've referenced, mentioned in the form of international terrorism distortion. Is there a legal structure or international instrument that bans the treatment of terrorists as heroes? And the example here of Laila Khaled of the PFLP is used. Now, of course, we do have legislation in many, many countries outlawing the glorification of terrorism, outlawing support for prescribed terrorist organizations, including Hamas and Hezbollah here in the United Kingdom. But what crossover do you think exists between the glorification of terrorism on the one hand and the denial of the 7th of October on the other? And do you see a potential crossover in terms of criminal law in that respect?
Mm-hmm. I think that the most important aspect of this is implementation of such laws, because we can have the best laws criminalizing all these forms of not only anti-Semitism, but spreading hatred, actually, against all possible groups. But if they are not being implemented properly or at all, then we are left with actually no legal consequences and no protection for the victims of such speech. I believe that the problem is that very often, more and more often, this glorification of terrorism is being presented as the support just for Palestinian rights and freedom fight, and not glorification of terrorism. And of course, the fight for Palestinian rights is fully legitimate and rightful, and there should be no legal limitations when one just wants to fight for the cause of Palestinians. But this very often public figures who glorify terror are actually not bearing any consequences of their speech. And from the point where they glorify some acts, let's say by Hamas or Hezbollah, to the point where they deny what happened, or deny the motivation of the perpetrators, here the terrorists of October 7th attacks, There is just a very thin line, and very often all these contents are mixed together. The most troubling for me is the lack of legal response, the lack of the intervention of the prosecutor's office in particular states. We have, with the International Association of Jewish Lawyers, we are engaged in many of such proceedings and cases all around Europe. One of the most troubling examples is Italy, where actually such a glorification of terrorism is happening on daily basis at universities, and there is actually no legal reaction by the state, because here actually the prosecutor should act automatically, so to say, and there is no such reaction at all. So I would say that the implementation of laws is here my main concern.
And the difficulty inevitably there exists in the potential blurring of lines. I mean, in my travels over the last year, which have taken me to Canada, while I was there, there was a very strong push across school boards for the adoption of what was termed anti-Palestinian racism, which was a term that was being advanced on the basis that it would essentially include essentially any advocacy for the state of Israel as being inherently anti-Palestinian and therefore racist and therefore something that ought to be controlled. And it strikes me that there's a question here that essentially touches on this very difficulty. One questioner asks about whether we should be very cautious about criminalizing Holocaust denial. They set out what I might summarize as a slippery slope argument. They say any law may be open to abuse. Thus, even if the concern is with the Nazis' genocide of Jews in the Holocaust, there will be people who try to have a law implemented or lobby to have it amended to include any event that in their eyes may be termed a Holocaust or genocide. The examples this questioner gives include the Irish potato famine of the 1940s, Stalin's collectivization of agriculture in Ukraine, so the Holodomor. And we are hearing, they say, an increasing misrepresentation of the use of the term genocide, of course, against Israel. Does criminalization of the Holocaust have the potential to lead to the criminalization of other historical discussions? And this questioner also asks about the potential impact on international relations as a result of that. There's a lot there to unpack, but what
Right.
are your thoughts?
But it actually it touches the core of the discussion on the penalization of negationism and Holocaust denial in particular. Well, I represent this part of the discussion, or this legal view that actually supports legal bans on Holocaust denial. Because for me, the law should serve also some symbolic, or should play some symbolic role, and also educational role. And of course, I'm fully aware of this slippery slope argument, and that restricting speech is always or comes always with risks. But at the same time, if we in Europe, in particular states, or at the level of Council of Europe and EU, if we agree that we penalize various forms of hate speech, xenophobic speech, racist speech, Islamophobic speech, anti-Semitic speech, then I don't see reasons why not to include Holocaust denial, which is for sure a form of anti-Semitism, into this scope of penalization. But I agree that the problematic aspect of it is if such bans should also apply to the denial of other atrocities. And exactly another genocides, which crimes are confirmed, so to say, by international law as being genocides, which are confirmed enough in order to be qualified as such. This was the argument of the European Court of Human Rights in Perinček case concerning Armenian genocide. So the court said that it cannot treat this denial in the same way as it treats Holocaust denial, because there are still historical disputes or legal disputes over the qualification of Armenian genocide or the atrocities committed against Armenians by the Turks. So the court wasn't convinced that this was indeed a genocide. But there are other examples, of course. I believe that it should be analyzed, debated, but Holocaust remains, also to quote European Court of Human Rights, clearly established historical fact. This is the notion that the European Court uses in order to describe historical events. So if something is a clearly established historical fact, even though I'm aware that this is in itself a problematic notion, so then the courts treat it differently than it treats events that are not that established, at least in the opinion of the court.
Aleksandra, we've only got about 5 minutes left and quite a few questions that I still want to put to you. So I'm going to try and run through them as quickly as possible. You've spoken about the implementation of law here being critical. Quite a number of questions on the moderation of social media. There is so much denial, distortion on social media. Do you have any thoughts on how social media platforms can be forced to deal with that and to be held to account over it in a better manner?
This is actually the most difficult element of this whole nowadays. There are attempts to regulate this field, and the EU quite recently implemented the Digital Services Act. That in itself has provisions, instruments that deal with hate speech online, and these huge providers of internet services, social media, will be obliged to act and to react towards hate speech appearing on their channels. But of course, if this is possible at all and how it will function in practice, we still don't know, because the states are now in the process of implementing the Digital Services Act into their national legislations. For example, in Poland now this act of implementation is being prepared, and of course there is also fierce opposition by these biggest players on the market, because it's for sure it's adding them a lot of obligations. Also in the financial sense of how to regulate what's and moderate what's appearing online. But I believe that this is the only way to hold them accountable and to implement really serious financial penalties in case of not implementing by the companies of the EU regulations. But this is, of course, only EU, and there are a lot of other legal spaces where such regulations do not apply. And this is perhaps for another discussion, also with the representatives of Twitter, Meta, X, whatever, TikTok, on how they feel about their responsibilities towards counteracting also denial and distortion.
And in terms of setting parameters and being able to essentially, I suppose, have a measuring stick, one questioner asks, they preface it with, this is a difficult question to ask. How many deaths of the total number of Jewish people who were killed in World War II amounts to Holocaust denial? In other words, statements of the type that, yes, Jewish people were killed by the Nazis, but it wasn't 6 million, only 100,000 or 1 million. What's your view on that level of distortion? Is all of it to be regarded essentially as falling foul of the legislation you've been talking about?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are various, as I said, various shapes of legal provisions and concerning Holocaust denial. Some of them explicitly mention also trivialization and minimalization of the number of victims, while others, like in the case of Poland, they only speak about Holocaust denial. So it applies to these who deny the Holocaust. But then there is, of course, the interpretation by the courts, and then it depends on the court how it qualifies particular statements. But generally, and within EU and Council of Europe, even minimalizing the number of victims counts as Holocaust denial.
There are a couple of questions I'll just reference if that's all right. One individual talks about the potential use of different language in combating the problem. So, for example, referring to Shoah denial instead of Holocaust denial, in the same way that there is a perhaps renewed use of the term Jew hatred rather than anti-Semitism. So, I'd ask briefly what effect you think that the linguistics associated with this might have. And also, if I can throw just a final second question in there, a question about the relationship between the establishment of Holocaust Memorial Day, education and advancement of knowledge around the Holocaust, and what part education should play in countering academic, political, and historical Holocaust denial.
Starting with the first one, with the linguistic aspect, I believe that we got used to, for decades now, to these notions of Holocaust denial, that it would be quite difficult to introduce now different names describing the same categories or crimes. But of course, I believe it should be open for discussions. But I'm glad for now that lawyers recognize the category of Holocaust denial. So I would be not that quick to confront them now with the new names and explanations why they are more relevant, even if this is the case. And the education aspect, memorial days, etc. I must honestly say, and I do it with great sadness, actually, that I completely lost faith in education after October 7th and after this year and a bit more. Because if we think about it, that these who spread the worst genocidal anti-Semitic contents in Western Europe, other places as well, but let's say in Western Europe, Holocaust education is a must. It's something obvious. All these people had contact with this education or were educated in this regard. If this is the result, then perhaps we should reconsider the very core, the basis of this education. Perhaps it should have been conducted in a completely different way, because the consequences, the results of what we are faced now with, for me, are devastating, and I'm really worried that in some 20-30 years there will be no Jewish life in Europe, exactly because of the events that we are witnessing right now.
Well, I'm very sorry that we end on that note, but I'm very grateful.
No, we're not giving up, and
yes,
the law
exactly.
should, yeah. So perhaps there is now a time for law to take a more important role, and to perhaps not to replace education, but also be used as an important tool of counteracting anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. And I will only add that one of the core missions of UKLFI Charitable Trust is to engage in that object of education, especially with everything that we've been witnessing in the last 13 months even, and to ensure that the misinformation is combated. Professor Gliszczynska-Grabias, thank you so much for joining us. I'm extremely grateful for your insights and the detail that you've been able to provide on that legislation and cases from across Europe. I know it's certainly given the audience an awful lot to think about. I'm so sorry we didn't get through all of the questions, but perhaps we'll have to pick the subject up on a future occasion. I'm very grateful for your time.
Thank you.